Well, good morning and good afternoon for folks joining us from the UK and Europe, and maybe good night for people from the other part of the world. Today is a special episode for football studies. We're gonna have the pleasure to host Chris Lee. Chris Lee is travel travel specialist, sports specialist as well. He's a writer of football in the context of history. He defines himself, he's a curious fan of football travel. He loves history, and he also runs a cultural blog and podcast named Outside Right. He's the author of Origin Stories, and the last book that we're going to probably talk a lot about today, Defiant, which talks about the history of football against fascism. Joining us as well from beautiful city of Wolverhampton, right, Alex? Correct me if I'm wrong. It's Alexandrou, the director of Football and War Network. He's our special commentator today. So Chris and Alex, thanks for joining me today. Again, it's a pleasure, and I'm very, very looking forward to our conversations. Alex, I'll give you the word first to you, and then I'm gonna give the word to Chris, so you can introduce yourself a little bit, and then we jump into questions.
Thank you, Felipe. As some colleagues may already know, I am the co-founder and chair of the Football and War Network, which brings together historians, both club historians, academic historians, and members of the public who are studying their family history, who have an interest in all aspects of football and war, be it that they're looking into their family histories and the linkages with the armed forces, or that they are looking at specific social or political aspects related to football and war. The Football and War Network has a very active Twitter account with over 3,000 followers, and we have a base at the University of Wolverhampton, where we have a platform on the university's website, and we run a very active blog article series, which Chris has contributed to as well, and we have well over 120 blog articles on all aspects of football and war. And we are delighted to be part of this new series for the Football and Studies YouTube channel, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Alex. Chris, welcome.
Yep. No, thank you for having me on. So my name is Chris Lee. By day, I am a digital marketer, really working, writing about things like software as a service. But kind of on the side, I found I was traveling a lot with work, and I started up, taking in matches at Amsterdam and Madrid and places like this that I was visiting, and I just decided to chronicle it in a blog. Really started as a blog and some social around it, and then added to podcasts and explore some deeper themes around football, because there's lots of people blogging about football, etc. But I wanted to find a niche which was more, to tap into that sort of ground hopping community. It went deeper than that. We're talking about football and society a lot more, and that sort of spoke a lot to the university dissertation that I did way back in the late 90s when I was at university in Madrid and also in the UK. And that was around football and regional identity in Spain. Regional identity in Spain as expressed through football. So it's a case study of FC Barcelona and Real Madrid, as you can imagine. And that was possibly, at that point in the late 90s, there was only really one book in English around football and politics, and that was Simon Cooper's Football Against the Enemy, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And since then, there's been a huge kind of body of work, which has been really great, because it's actually having a look at what football's role in society has been. And as you mentioned, the last couple of years, I've had 2 books out. 2021, I got Origin Stories, The Pioneers Who Took Football to the World, which is basically a country by country exploration of how the game got started in each country. So rough chronological order. So we go England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, etc. And obviously there's a chapter on Brazil in there, and the United States, I'd like to say, because it's very important to the early game, which people often underestimate. But also my second follow-up book, which was very much a lockdown project, I didn't get the chance to sort of do any field work for that because it was, because it was COVID times. But that was the Defiant: A History of Football Against Fascism, which kind of, because I looked at the the agenda, and I saw that it was actually going to be the centenary of Mussolini's march on Rome in October, which happened in October 1922. And I thought, gosh, if I can get this out for the anniversary of the centenary of that, that'd be really topical. And of course, this coincided with the rise of the far right again in Italy and various other places in Europe. So I thought it's quite topical. And so, yeah, we're going to cover some of the topics and the themes it covers in that book as we go through today, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Definitely gonna cover not just Mussolini's regime, but I guess we're gonna jump into Franco as well. Salazar. Those two were also part of my dissertation, so I'm very, very curious to see what you bring today. What your perspectives. So we're gonna jump into the questions. We have prepared 5 questions, but we can expand based on the interactions and the comments that we're gonna definitely generate. So the first question that I have today is associated with the idea of football never being free of politics, right? And many people still believe in that. So for those that still hesitate to acknowledge this inherent connection between football and politics, it seems important to consider the 20th century exploitation of football by fascist regimes that your book covers. So can you, with well-known and lesser discussed examples, share the different ways fascist regimes have used football for their political aims, and explain why they have decided to approach football and perhaps not other sports?
No, fair enough. Yeah, that's I think to do that, we'll just have to sort of immediately address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, that football and politics do mix. All sports and politics do mix, and anyone who thinks otherwise is either, I don't know, probably should read more history books. But just look at the recent shenanigans at the Spanish Football Association, for example, or you can, today, the day that we're recording, is the 50th anniversary of the coup in Chile, run by the Chilean military, Augusto Pinochet, or Pinochet as some people know him, overthrowing Salvador Allende. And that was incredibly politicized from the off, with the football element of that, with the USSR refusing to play in the Estadio Nacional, which is where the had been a detention center. Therefore, after the Pinochet coup. And that was, this is just goes to show these little reminders all the time of football's or sports involvement in, touching on either extreme politics, such as a coup and a takeover, or something that's more societal, like this, what's happening in the Spanish FA. But if we go back right to the beginning of football, it's always been political. Before I come and touch on the fascist element, because that doesn't arrive till the 1920s and 30s. Football starts in, association code football, as we're talking about right here, which is properly codified by the English FA Football Association in 1863. It's built on the school rules of various places like Harrow, Eton, Cambridge University, Charterhouse, and even some private clubs like Sheffield FC, which was involved, which is the world's oldest club. So these all kind of came together to create kind of this rule book. And at that point, it was very much the gentleman's game. It was like upper class people, because only they had time to play, to have recreation time. And the workers, the plebs, were too busy down mines and up chimneys and things like that. You get the Factory Acts, various acts in the 1870s, which gives people in England and Britain, Great Britain, I should say, at that point, kind of Saturday afternoon off. And suddenly, it goes from being something that gentlemen are playing to something that people are actually watching as well. So you see this societal change. You see that it's like football becomes a class issue in Britain, where the working class want to start playing it. Factories set up teams. People are quite happy for that to happen, because it keeps them kind of out of pubs and keeps them healthy and distracted. So so it becomes this working. You see this pivotal decade of the 1870s and 1880s, where the upper classes that traditionally run English football and certainly played it at this point, they get overtaken. So talking about the old Etonians winning the FA Cup regularly, or the military team called the Royal Engineers and people like that. They or Wanderers, which was a gentleman's club that played around the place, you can imagine by the name Wanderers. In 1883, Blackburn Olympic becomes the first working class club to win it. The first northern club. Northern England have been, very industrialized, and that's the sort of last time that the upper classes win that, and then professionalism comes in a few years later, and that completely embeds it as a working class sport that actually gives opportunities to working class men at this point and women later to earn money through playing sport. However, while this is happening here in the UK, I'm talking about in particular, the game is also being exported abroad. And it has a similar route everywhere else. It starts potentially usually with British expat communities or with upper class people from those countries that take that game back with them. And it still becomes an upper class kind of sport in those places, but then kind of filters into the working class, and we see these slow takeovers as we had seen in England. I think where the first time we see football become politically internationally is over in Ireland. And I mention this because there's a big discussion about identity and colonialism around British sports, like football, like rugby, like hockey, like cricket, against local sports such as Gaelic football and hurling. And you see the creation of the Gaelic Athletic Association in 1884, which is around protecting Irish sports. And there was a huge kind of like discussion within Ireland, and even the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association, banned players from not just playing but also watching these British sports, these garrison games as they called them, because obviously Ireland was under British occupation at this point in the late 19th century, and that went up till 1971, that ban. So it went quite a way into 50 years after the Irish Free State, or what is now the Republic of Ireland, to become independent. So it's really fascinating to see that that's where I think personally it begins. I think also you see football become part of the national awakening and identity in places like Argentina and Uruguay, in Egypt, and after World War I, and also even Turkey. So Turkey was occupied by the British and French forces after the fall of the Ottomans, and because they'd sided with Germany in that axis in World War I. And as the sort of British and French were leaving, they were playing these various football matches against what was now, Ataturk's Turkey. And Fenerbahce, which is one of their most prominent three clubs, as you know, was one of the key players in this, and they beat a British regiment, strong British regiment team that had one like former Chelsea player in their ranks, on their way out. So there's a final match. So it's really interesting how football and identity and politics, certainly in a sort of masculine context anyway at this point, really exists within the Britain at the same time, just after World War I. The women's game is taking off to the point where it's scaring the FA enough to ban it. So because they're getting crowds of 50,000 plus, and the men are sort of like back from the war now and all that sort of thing. So this takes us up to the 1920s, I guess, where Mussolini does his March on Rome in 1922. Italy at this point is not good at football. Let's make that really clear. It's a disparate country, and if we think about the state of it, it's only been unified for like 60 years. And one of the architects of the Risorgimento, as it's known, the sort of unification of Italy, which previously in this 1860s, 61, previously it had been lots of disparate states. They put this thing together. His name was Massimo D'Anzelio, and he said, "We've made Italy, and now we should make Italians." And sort of what Mussolini does is sort of takes that forward, and he uses football as one of his tools to bring it together. So sport becomes this like propaganda tool, both domestically and internationally, where domestically they have this thing called the Charter of Viareggio, which is the town where they met and got it together to sort of say, this is what our blueprint is for the future of Italian football. They form various new clubs. So Roma, for example, Roma shirt right behind you, that was a formation of three, or an amalgam, I should say, of three clubs. They wanted a really strong Roman club. However, one of the clubs that resisted that move was SS Lazio, which is obviously like independent of Roma, and they've got one of the biggest rivalries now, cross-city rivalries in the world. However, that wasn't a sort of benevolent anti-fascist move or anything. It was the guy that was running it. Just I think he was quite well connected and said, "No, I'd rather keep my club independent, thank you." So also Fiorentina, which is my team in Italy, they were formed by an amalgam of two teams in Florence because they wanted a strong Florentine team as well. He creates Serie A, which is, as you know, is the sort of unified league. He reboots the Coppa Italia. So there's this one national competition, league competition, there's a national cup competition. And you see this sort of like filter through domestically to this sense of creating Italians. Now, going to the 1930s and the World Cup suddenly exists. Okay, so previously the premium world tournament had been the Olympic competition, which had been amateur, which is why the British teams, which had hitherto before the 1920s won pretty much all the gold medals, they don't, or they do enter, but then they stop entering in these, or taking, you know, that don't have the best players available to them in the 20s and 30s. And you see other amateur sides come up, like Uruguay wins back-to-back golds, so they get the right to hold 1930 World Cup, which Italy doesn't go to. Italy wins the right to host the 1934 World Cup, by which time Mussolini has realized the power of this sport. It's grown in popularity domestically and internationally. I think we pretty much say by the 1930 World Cup, it is globally the world's leading sport. It's not necessarily the most popular even in Italy. It shares the front page with the Giro d'Italia, you know, the cycling as well around this sort of time. So they host it and win it. Obviously, as everyone knows, they win 1936 gold at the amateur side does at the Berlin Olympics. They win the 1938 World Cup in France, and this is where first time we see a lot of opposition to the regime, because it's like, you know, by then Italy's involved in the Spanish Civil War. Italian aircraft are bombing civilians in Spain. There's lots of expatriates in France where it's held, and so we see a lot of opposition to it, especially in Marseille, which is obviously not a million miles from the Italian border. And so this is where we sort of see the first sort of kind of anti-fascist activity. But what I would say also about that is one of the reasons that they made Italy so strong was they banned a lot on foreign players, but at the same time they kind of allowed players of Italian descent, or oriundi or impatriati as they were also known, people like Luis Monti, who played for Argentina in 1930 World Cup final. There were a few others like Raimondo Orsi and Attilio Di Maria, who was also in the Argentinian squad. So you can prove your links back to Italy, and you're a good enough player, you can come and play for Italy. So they kind of they realized that they were, you know, you could bypass their own laws on who and who wasn't an Italian, and strengthen the national side that way. So yeah, it was quite clearly and overtly part of their kind of the agenda of the first fascist regime, the Mussolini regime, at this point. Now, Germany wants to copy this. Adolf Hitler is like, you know, once it sees all this sporting success, they'd already been awarded the right to host the 36 Olympics before he came to power in 33. So, you know, they just sort of took that and run with it as a sort of like propaganda tool. However, especially after the Anschluss, which is the forced unification of Germany and Austria by the Nazis in 1938. Austria had a very good team, although it had the Wunder team, or what was left of it. They peaked by then, semi-finalists in 1934. A lot of their best players refused to play for the unified team, people like Matthias Sindelar, who was their great star at that point. And they didn't play very well as a team. So when Germany, which included the Austrian team, went to the 1938 World Cup, they got knocked out pretty early by Switzerland in a replay, and so it was it failed from that point of view. Hitler only went to one football match, and that was Germany getting knocked out of his own Olympics by Norway 2-0, and he left early, having seen the second goal. So he wasn't really interested in it at all. Now, if we go to sort of Spain, which is sort of the next fascist regime, Franco, he really was a football fan, and this is the difference, and I'm sure we're going to cover him in more depth as we go to this, because Mussolini didn't go to, for example, allegedly didn't go to the 1934 World Cup winning after party. Like I said, Hitler only went to one match, but Franco was a regular, right? He made sure that football was part of his state, the sport was part of his state. He had a party called the Falange, and he put a Falangista, one of his sort of members, on every club board. So basically there was a fascist presence all the way through La Liga. He names the cup after himself. I've often said that you can tell the history of the 20th century history of Spain through the name of its cup competition. So if we know it now as the Copa del Rey, right? It's the Spanish FA Cup, effectively. It started as the Copa de la Coronación in 1902, so the Coronation Cup, the coronation of Alfonso XIII. He's the guy who bestows all the royal titles. People like Real Madrid, Real Zaragoza, Real Sociedad, they all come from that royal decree, effectively. Alfonso XIII, big fan of football. It becomes a Copa del Rey, and then once the Second Spanish Republic takes over in 1931, the monarchy flees the country. And for a while, it's Copa de la República, or the Presidencia de la República, so the cup of the president of the Republic's cup. Very long-winded name, that. And then also during the Civil War, it becomes the Copa de España Libre, or the Cup of Free Spain, which is not recognized by the RFEF, the Spanish FA, at the moment. So Levante won that, Levante being the second team of Valencia. Very interesting story behind that, which I cover in my book. Then Franco comes along. It becomes the Copa del Generalissimo until the 70s, so while he's in charge. So he's the Generalissimo, the very big general. And then he dies. King Juan Carlos comes back to the throne, democracy is restored, and it's the Copa del Rey again. But during that time, it's named after him. He does use the national side, for example, when they beat England in 1950, to sort of make a barb about the World Cup in 1950, about Gibraltar and things like that. He then refuses to allow the team to play communist USSR in the 1960 European Championship. However, he allows them to play in the 1964 one when they beat USSR, and then in the final to win their first piece of major silverware, the European Championship. And that's a big thing for them, because he then ties that into his own myth about like how he defeated communism and all that sort of thing. So that was how Franco used it, and I know we're going to cover in more depth with his alleged relationship with Real Madrid later on. I think we need to really look closely at the nuance behind those relationships. I'm sure you've got, Philippe, some things to say about that.
Yep.
Then just finally on that, just before we look at, within European sphere, there's Salazar in Portugal, who's kind of, I guess, one of the forgotten dictators, because Portugal was very peripheral to European affairs at that point. And they don't really get good at football, let's face it, till the 60s, with the coming of Eusébio, Silva Ferreira, and Maria Coluna, both of which came from the what was Portugal's African colonies at the time. And they helped form the crux of not only the Portuguese national side, but the Benfica side that become European champions twice. And at this point, you start seeing Portugal talk about the three Fs: Fado, which is their folk music; Fatima, which is obviously their pilgrimage site; and then football. So football becomes part of the sort of the promotion system of Portugal as a place, as a source of national pride. And I think we're going to counter later how football plays a part in the downfall of the Salazar regime. But just the other final element that I've covered, which I think, Philippe, you're probably closer to, is the Latin American dictatorships. Obviously, Brazil was under dictatorship from 64 to the 80s. Argentina 78 is the obvious one, the most famous. Uruguay, famously in 1980, tries to replicate the success of Argentina 78 by running the Mundialito, which is the World Cup, which features all the previous World Cup winners, apart from England, who refused to go, true to form as previous tournaments. And Netherlands go instead as the runners-up of the previous two World Cups. Yes, Uruguay kind of wins their own small World Cup, but actually, if anything, it shines a light on the dictatorship, and it's like, again, helps kind of speed their decline. So it's a fascinating topic, and I think we just have to remember that football has been part of politics all the way right from the beginning, and I guess it very much depends on your agenda of who you are as a leading political party as to what role sport plays, in trying to get your objective across, really.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating how they are very connected. When I listen to you, I remember that the very, very popular Spanish football national team blue jersey, right? They won in 2010, right? That was created by Franco's regime, that they changed the color to blue because of the Phalanges color, right? That they were blue. So
there was some real pettiness around the color red. I just want to point this out before we get to the next question. While you were talking about it, they wore blue in Spain after the Civil War during the 40s, basically. And when they played Portugal, kind of somewhere in the late 30s, in an unofficial friendly in Vigo, Spain, both Portugal playing claret as well, as you know, but they refused to wear red because it's so close to the communist sort of color, and they wore white, and Spain wore blue, and even in Osasuna, for example, which, you know, in Pamplona, they were burning Osasuna shirts because they were red, and it's just like, it gets incredibly petty around the color red. They asked Benfica to change their nickname from being the Reds to the Scarlets, Vermelhos, to Encarnados or something like that. I can't remember now, but it's like something, so yeah, it gets to that level of pettiness around the color red. Fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Alex, any initial comments?
A couple. Just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that Chris highlighted. Like to go back to the Italian fascist regime. I think, to a large degree, I see that as a template for how to utilize football for political means. The propaganda usage of football by the fascist regime, not only at national and international level, but at local level as well. A good example, Chris mentioned a couple of teams there. Another team that was significant for the fascist regime was Bologna. They won Serie A a number of times, but also in between the two World Cup successes, Bologna won a European competition in Paris. And again, the propaganda value beyond the borders of Italy was quite significant. And it's the manner in which football was utilized by the fascist regime, and how, as Franco did in Spain, how they implanted fascist officials within football clubs around Italy. Again, once you embed your regime into one of the most popular sports, you are going to have an impact on society and on football fans, particularly if those teams are successful, such as Bologna, not only internally but externally, but also winning those 2 World Cups. So that is quite important. Again, Chris mentioned the Rubiales affair. Now, what we're seeing there in Spain is not just related to Rubiales and his actions, but is also linked to the very strong Spanish feminist movement that country has. And they have been campaigning for many, many decades. There are still significant issues which the actions of Rubiales has brought to the fore, but it has further politicized the issue of equity and equality for women within Spanish society, and has given more credence to the Spanish feminist movement. And the Rubiales is now a vehicle to actually try and break down more barriers and remove obstacles to greater equity and equality. And that has happened because Spanish female footballers have been prepared to take a stand. And as Chris quite rightly says, you can never not mix football and politics. And as we said in the previous episode, we saw how political football got in Great Britain, particularly in terms of the First World War and issues around the recruitment of footballers to fighting in the First World War. So Chris is absolutely right. You either have to be naive or quite stupid not to realize that there is a significant explicit link between football and politics. And just 2 more examples. It's, the wearing of rainbow armbands and the issues that have been created with FIFA around that as well. And also the issues around the Qatar World Cup and the Saudi Pro League at the moment.
Yeah.
If I could add some more to that, actually, you could add taking of the knee, which seems to upset certain countries in the former Eastern Bloc a lot more than others. And also the wearing of the poppy in the UK can be divisive, especially for, Irish players, which it has been in the past, because obviously there's a history of the British Army in Ireland isn't great. So, yeah, I mean, it's a topic that's going to run and run, really, I think. But like you, I was really surprised by the Rubiales thing, because I lived in Spain and I've seen how much progress they've made. I think nearly half, if not more than half, of Spanish MPs are women now. And given where they were coming from in the Franco era, there's very, very traditional view of women and women's place, I should say, to where they are now. I just thought it was so retrograde in terms of like, you know, I really didn't expect that. But it's in many ways it's good to see that finally he has gone, so to speak, and there hopefully lessons will be learned and attitudes will change.
Yeah, precisely. So we're gonna probably talk more about the roots of this behavior from Rubiales. I think in some sense it's associated with what we've seen in during Franco's regime, right? Like the predominance of the male over the women, the idea of controlling their bodies, I think is quite impactful. Chris, I think we could also bring a lot of other examples to highlight this relationship between football and politics. I was just reminding the example of Inter Milan, which is called Ambrosiana, right? Because the word Inter was not very welcome because of the international communists. So definitely there are more examples, and right now we just I highly recommend your book for the viewers because they will find other examples there for sure. But let's jump into the second question, because your book covers acts of resistance against fascist regimes, right? In different contexts, and you bring the existence of spies, rebels, partisans, and activists. So I'm very curious to understand the motivation behind your decision to approach your research from this perspective. And in addition to that, can you tell us the most captivating discoveries that you made and you wrote in your book, and how these acts of defiance impacted the respective broader social political landscapes of the countries that you
I just thought I'd give like a counter perspective really to the current, you know, the narrative, especially that a lot of modern football culture is right-leaning, especially much of Italy and Spain, Eastern Europe. I wanted to present the converse story, especially around extreme events like the wars, so with Italian partisans, Greek partisans, and also sort of football under dictators. Because basically I think in terms of like, if you think about a dictatorship, luckily enough never to lived under one, but it's obviously a very strong act to actually defy it in any small way, even just protesting quite often. So when you've got actually people, you know, doing mass acts, it's quite impressive. I think my favorite story is the one I kind of alluded to earlier, which is the kind of towards the end of Salazar's reign. I think he was actually in a coma at the time, or just had a stroke or something, but his stand-in Caetano was in charge. 1969, very sort of like febrile part of Portuguese history, and just towards the end of the Salazar dictatorship. Obviously, you know, the leading clubs are Benfica, etc. And like I said, there's a lot of their players came from the African colonies. Now, the African colonies are fighting Portugal at this time for independence. So we think about Angola, Mozambique, and places like this. Now, if you're a student in Portugal at this time, and you sort of, you know, failed at your exams or anything like that, you could get sent out to fight in the colonial wars, a little bit, I guess, like, you know, in Vietnam and the American sort of experience. So a lot of young guys were going off to fight in Africa for cause they didn't necessarily believe in, because they've been sort of like kind of forced to. So the you have this situation where the leading kind of one of the leading clubs is Académica de Coimbra, which is very much linked to the Europe's oldest university, one of the oldest universities, I should say. I think Bologna is the oldest in Europe, but Coimbra is certainly up there as one of them. And it's at this point it was amateur, so you know, if you're a student, you'd often play for the university side. Interestingly, so while this is going on, there were some student protests around the campus, but at the same time, they had an incredible Portuguese Cup run. They went all to the final. So what they do in the final is quite bold. They also briefed Benfica, their opponents, on what they were going to do, and they said they lots of tens of thousands of students came down from Coimbra to Lisbon, which is not that far, but they to the Stadio de Jamor, which is also where Celtic won the European Cup, so people might recognise it's kind of big, kind of open concrete ball with some woodland behind it. It's a big event in Portugal, the Portuguese Cup final. so that all the eyes in the media would be on it. But as the police, they couldn't really sort of like marshal these tens of thousands of students that are descending on Jammu or the capital. So they kind of just switched off the television broadcast. A lot of the high brass top brass didn't go from the government, and there was protests throughout the game. And when the Académica de Coimbra players came on the pitch, they came wearing their gowns, and it was like they walked on very slowly as if they were pallbearers at a funeral, and they're kind of emphasizing the death of like Portugal's freedom and all this sort of thing. So they take an early lead, which is fascinating, because I imagine if they'd won it, but they didn't. I think Benfica equalised, and then Eusébio himself scored the winner in extra time. But they celebrated. Benfica were good enough to celebrate with Académica de Coimbra. Congratulate them, and they sort of understood why they were doing these things. Now, this kind of was a big moment because it gave the public confidence that they could stand up to the regime, which is something that hitherto hadn't really been challenged. So there's two incidents. One, the Coimbra protests against, at the campus when they'd actually sort of sealed themselves off, and then just 1 year after all the student events in 1968. So they're gaining this confidence anyway, students, young people finding their voice. And then this cup final that kind of emphasizes it. So the regime kind of weakens. Salazar himself dies. His kind of stand-ins aren't anywhere near as, well, he wasn't really he was more sort of technocratic leader. If you sort of learn more about him, he's not like this charismatic ones that the other dictators in Europe at that time or before. And the regime falls in the sort of pretty much bloodless revolution, the Carnation Revolution of 25th of April 1974. And the guy who I interviewed, who wrote a film called Futebol de Causas, which is Football with a Cause. He wrote a film about this, or made a film about this this team and that sort of run to the Portuguese FA Cup final, and he attributed it to giving the Portuguese public confidence to do that. So I think that's the first time that story really had appeared in English before. Another one that has a Greek partisan story has never really been told in English before. The Italians have been a little bit. I think Italy as a first. I had to put it as the first chapter. I think a lot of people are familiar with the Mussolini story, less so with the partisan story, but there's at least 5 stadiums in Italy that are named after people who died as partisans after Italy changed sides in 1943. Then, it's a particularly tragic story is Carlo Castellani, who was the top scorer for Empoli. Empoli's just about 40 kilometers west of Florence. He was their leading scorer at that point. The stadium now is named after him. But his father was accused of being active in the sort of resistance, and the Italian collaborative police and Nazi Germany kind of were in cahoots at this point in northern Italy, and they went round to kind of find his father. He wasn't there, so Carlo himself offered himself to go to the police station to answer some questions, and rather than he never came back. He thought, I'll just be gone an hour, I'll come back. He wasn't. He was taken off to a notorious death camp called a work camp, which led to a lot of people's death, called Mauthausen. And so the stadium's named after him now. But the other story that I found particularly interesting, especially within modern context of how tells a little bit about Croatia and the way it is Hajduk Split. So Hajduk means bandit. They were founded in I remember the early part of the 20th century by students. Became quite a famous club in Split, and obviously going into World War II, that part of the Balkans gets occupied or taken over by first the Italians, I think it was, in Croatia, and then kind of there's and then Nazi Germany after the Italians kind of pretty much fail, same way as they failed in Greece and Albania and various other places. But so they take up German resources, having to go down there. But they also kind of put this puppet local sympathizers in called the Stasi regime. Now, Split rather than becoming part of this Serie A, they were offered to be part of, in the Italian league while they were occupied by Italy. Mm-hmm. They said no thanks, and they disbanded. But then they reformed on the Isle of Vis, which is like a small island off Croatia. And after Italy's kind of starts getting taken by the Allies in the 40s, they start playing matches in places like Bari against British clubs, which have England internationals playing amongst their team. And they do a little tour of the Mediterranean, sort of raising awareness of particularly for Tito, who ends up becoming the communist leader of what is Yugoslavia after World War II. So and then they play just before while they're in the Nazis in retreat and the Ustasa in retreat, and I think they're only about 10 kilometers from the front line or whatever. They had a match at Split against, again, another British Army 11. I think it's Boxing Day 1944 or something like that. So it's quite near the end of the war. But obviously football was a big part of Croatia/Yugoslavia at that point, kind of rediscovering itself, and it kind of helps set up the following regime that comes in. So they are a communist regime because it's the first time they fly the new Yugoslav flag with the red star in it at one of these matches. But they weren't as close to Moscow as a lot of other, what becomes communist bloc countries. Now, what I find interesting about that is I put that out there. I did a blog post and I put it out saying these are 11 clubs that changed the course of football history. And another reason for that is because they introduced ultra culture from Brazil, actually, in the 1950s. So apparently a lot of them went to Yugoslavia, Split fans, for the 1950 World Cup, saw how the torcidas were behaving, and they decided, let's have some of that atmosphere, let's create some songs, some tifo, some other stuff. And they brought that back. And so this is where ultra culture in Europe starts, really. And so they're a really significant club. I put this out there, and I didn't realize until this point that I got a lot of feedback from Croatia saying, well, you realize that now, one of the prevailing views anyway among certain ultra groups in Croatia is that they don't like that story about the Hajduk split in 1940s. They're more to the right, shall we say. So I was really surprised to learn that, and it's a shame in many ways, because Croatia should be, as the latest member of the European Union and Schengen, should be the progressive, and so it's a bit of a shame to sort of hear that viewpoint prevails if it's true. So there we are. That's kind of that's right. Those are some of the stories that I thought were particularly interesting from the book that wanted to explore.
That's fascinating. Alex, any thoughts on...
Yes, picking up again on the point Chris just made about the British Army representative teams following the advance of the Allied forces through Yugoslavia, through Italy. These matches were quite significant, because what it meant was that just behind the front lines, these football matches will bring in not only a form of normality to the populace, they were able to watch football matches, but really from the populace perspective, in effect, this is an act of defiance or resistance, that they are going to watch the British Army play a local team, some of which would have been made up of partisans or other people who had actively been campaigning against the fascist regimes. And I think this is key, because as a tool, these representative matches actually were getting the populace on side with a different type of political regime, getting them to sort of recognize that democracy is on its way in whichever form that actually comes, and actually undermining any possible attempt by the regime to sort of go underground and then come back up. Again, it's part of that overall strategy. Yeah. And in one of the matches, we see a joint Lazio-Roma team take on a British Army team. And we have a blog article about that that is based on one of the players who participated on the British Army side. But also it's the type of players and managers that were involved in these British Army teams. One of these touring teams was led by Matt Busby, who would later become one of the most famous managers. We have the Busby Bays, we have the Munich air disaster and the resurrection through the 1968 European Cup victory against Benfica. And bizarrely, Matt Busby met Jimmy Murphy on this tour. Jimmy Murphy was actually doing a lot of fighting and was taken away from the fighting to actually be part of this touring squad. And so hence we see one of the greatest managerial partnerships that there's ever been created through this. I would say this was a very political footballing activity. So Chris is quite right to highlight the importance of these matches, and they had importance from a multi-lens perspective.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, there's two other managers that kind of come together during the war as well, which is Egri Erbstein and Bela Gutmann. And Erbstein, for those not familiar with him, he died with the Grande Torino in 1949 in the Superga air disaster. He was their coach, but he survived the Holocaust in Budapest as a Jewish manager. And Bela Gutmann, who went on to create that great Benfica side, Slanio Serbio, win the European Cup twice, and then when they let him go, allegedly cursed them, and Benfica have never won a European trophy of any description since. So they came together trying to escape in Budapest, and they did successfully. Unfortunately, ended in tragedy for Erbstein not that long after.
I think Bela Gutmann's story is quite significant. Not only was he a major, coach of very high standing, he escaped the pogroms that were going through Eastern Europe in the 20s and 30s. But he then survived the Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp. So if you ever want to read a good story about Bela Gutmann, then David Bolshover's book is a very significant book to read. So again, I think Chris is right to highlight those two individuals. Again, that's where we see a different type of politicization of football.
Yeah, I think we'll add one very particular personality in Portuguese football. Probably Chris have crossed in his studies Cândido de Oliveira. He was former coach of Sporting, and he was a spy for the British, and to organize a resistance in Portugal against the Nazis. He was sent to the Tarrafal camp in Africa. He came back later to Portugal. He coached Sporting to a successful season, and he died covering the World Cup in Sweden, if I'm not correct. And if you go nowadays to Sporting Club Museum, you're gonna have a little bit of the history of Cândido de Oliveira, which, if I'm not wrong, Chris, you can correct me. The Portuguese Cup is named after him.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the equivalent of the Charity Shield, which were the Super Cup.
Yes.
Yeah.
And listen to you, Chris. The example that you gave about Académica de Coimbra was particularly curious because it happened at the Jamor Stadium, right? The Stadium Jamor, that was built by Salazar at the beginning of his regime as an iconic site. It's part of that idea of Salazar to make Portugal important in the international context, right? So it was very contradictory at the same time for Salazar's regime.
Cândido de Oliveira, weirdly, he appears in both my books because he was he's so important to the Portuguese story, football story, because he was part of the Casa Pia team that kind of democratized the game, took it again with, like, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, where it's like it was the upper class game in Portugal again, and it's the Casa Pia, which had its roots in a what's the word I'm looking for? Orphanage. Kid, I mean, his parents died when he was young, and he was taken in by the school, and it was a charitable organization. It helped democratize the game, and they won the very first Lisbon Championship unbeaten, a bit like Preston North End in their first season. And he was part of that, and I think he went on to Benfica, coached Portugal, then at the Olympics. So there's he was a really interesting character, and I think that we need to celebrate characters like this who have perhaps been lost to the mist of time because they kind of were around before the mass media era.
Yeah, precisely. Again, fascinating stories. You can get more about it by reading Chris' book. So please order them on Amazon, right, Chris? I think we're gonna make the link available.
Cool, thank you.
So Chris, let's go into the third question, because I think this one is very important, at the same time polemical, because it involves different perspectives on history. Also, how we also do history, right? So normally for the general public, the stories that are written in history books are often synonymous with true, right? What is written in the history books, we conceive as true. But even historians are aware that the communication of the past is influenced by power relationships, and we are susceptible them for incongruence and fallacies. In my doctoral research, I uncovered fallacies such as that Franco was a Real Madrid supporter, something that there's no proof about it, documented proof at least, or that Eusebio did not play abroad because there was an order from Salazar preventing him to join Inter Milan, which was in fact a ban from the Italian federation that only wanted nationals to play in Italy at that time. That was literally the time that blocked the transfer from Eusebio from Benfica to Inter Milan. So could you share if you encounter any football myths while exploring the relationship between fascist regimes and football?
Yeah, I mean, I opened the whole book with the biggest myth of them all, really, which was the death match of Kiev in 1942, which those who've seen Escape to Victory, the match reaching Pelé, and who else is in that? Bobby Moore, Sylvester Stallone, various other people. That's based on this story. So basically, the premise of the Escape to Victory is that they play the Nazis. They're meant to lose, and then they're going to escape into the sort of like Paris sewer network and run away. What it's based on is a real match, or a series of matches rather, in Kiev, which was occupied by the Nazis in 1940 during World War II. And basically what happened is there was a series of matches between local sides within Kiev, and that included a German side from their Luftwaffe, which is the Air Force, and they were called Flak Elf. So the Flak 11, the Flak is what you shoot up in the air to knock aircrafts down. And there was various other teams, and one of them was called FC Start, which was from a bakery, and it featured various players from Dinamo and Lokomotiva, who were the sort of like the big local football clubs. Bear in mind that they would have been very malnourished and worked very hard at this point as locals. Nazis did some terrible things, as everyone knows, in Ukraine. So basically there was this match of this league, and there was a particular rematch of one match that took place. And on the 9th of August, I believe it was, in 1942. And it was a rematch effectively of another game. So there's various rumors about what happened, whether they would, the ref was lenient and pro the German side, and also whether or not the Flak Elf players, the Start players, the local Ukrainians were kind of bullied into saying, you must lose. But either which way, they win 5-3. Now, what happens after that is that 4 of the 11 FC Start players are arrested and die in detention or are executed in the following weeks. When the Soviets retake Ukraine after World War II, or so 1944, 45, whenever it was, they took Ukraine back into the Soviet Union. They propagate this sort of myth that the whole team was executed because they'd beaten the Nazis, and that was like the myth that prevailed. And I think that was probably still around, kind of for a while. In fact, some people probably still believe it. And there's some, there's a great book out there on it actually, which the name of the author escapes me unfortunately, but it's called If You're Honor of Kiev or something like that. Either which way, there's statues to those 4 players in Kiev, and as a story, even before the Ukrainian and Russia war, it became an issue, a political issue during just the point. Euro 2012, wasn't it? Ukraine co-hosted with Poland. And I think before that there was a Russian dramatization of that event, and Ukrainians didn't come out very well as part of it. So there was, that created a diplomatic furore between those two countries even before actual, real animosity sort of kicked off. So the it's been a very interesting topic, a political topic, and it's all around a football match, and it's all been pretty much, the myth around it has been accelerated by the experience of what happened to 4 of the 11 players afterwards. So there's one of the sort of myths. The other one I want to address is the Franco one that you've alluded to as well. I'd be interested to hear about your research on that. But as I mentioned before, people often, Alec Ferguson, I think it was himself, at one point, so he referred to Real Madrid as Franco's club. I think that's when they were trying to court Cristiano Ronaldo to sign for Real Madrid. So that kind of riled the Spanish press somewhat, and they were going, "Oh, we remember that he's a Labour Party member." Now, the thing is, with that is you have to look at Real Madrid in the whole context of its entire history. So let's deal with Real Madrid first, then we'll deal with Franco. So first, Madrid Football Club, again, like every other club that's formed in any kind of football in Spain, was formed by gentlemen. So I think they'd had education in England. They get the Real title from Alfonso XIII, that I mentioned before, in 1920, I think that is. They become Real Madrid. And during the 19th, so they're kind of establishment club, I suppose. They're not even that. They are part of the kind of big 3 at that point. They're a founder member of La Liga, of course. And when I say the big 3 at that point, obviously Barcelona is the other one, and Athletic Club de Bilbao is the other 3. And neither of them have been relegated from La Liga since its foundation in 1929. 1931, the Second Spanish Republic comes along. They kind of throw out the old regimes of the Catholic Church, the landowners. There's going to be far more autonomy for the regions, the Basque Country, the Catalans, the Gallegos. There's going to be lots more independence, a lot more freedom for women, equal opportunity, all this sort of thing. So they start going about, and the person that declares the Second Spanish Republic and outside the post office, which is now the Ayuntamiento, the town hall of Madrid, in Plaza de Cibeles, which is where Real Madrid celebrate their cup wins in Madrid. His name is Rafael Sanchez Guerra. He's the soon-to-be president of what is back to being Madrid Football Club, or Club de Football. It's not. They've dropped the Real bit because they're not into royalty anymore. This is the Republic. He's still around in 1936 when the war breaks out, and if anything, there's sort of communists on the board at this point. The Estadio de Chamartín, which was their stadium at the time, a lot of it's dismantled to take part in the siege to defend Madrid from Franco's forces, who are trying to besiege Madrid. Expected it to fall very quickly and didn't. 3 years later, they're still trying to pummel it. So it's it's kind of in ruins at the end of the war. And what happens after the war is that La Liga starts again. A lot of the players are reintegrated into the system. Atletico Madrid become part of Atletico Aviación, so they're merged with the Air Force team. They win a bunch of leagues. Valencia wins 3 titles in the 40s. Barca win a couple of titles. They're back from their kind of foreign tour. Real Madrid, as they are now back, are being rebuilt at this point by Santiago Bernabeu, who's the guy who the stadium's named after. He was a nationalist. He had lost the presidential bid campaign to Sanchez Guerra when they were, previous time. He'd been a striker for Real Madrid in the 20s. So he rebuilds the club. So they don't actually win anything to the mid-50s. And that coincides with the rise of European football, the rise of television, international travel, all those sort of things. They're in the right place, right time, really. Had Grande Torino been still going, they may well have been the preeminent team of the 50s. So, there's kind of he sees the benefit of this, Spanish embajadores, the embassy abroad, effectively. Soft power at a time when Spain is trying to court the world. It's isolated because it's one of the it was on the losing side, effectively. It didn't get involved in World War II, but it was still aligned with them. So you still, countries that have a fascist dictatorship, like Spain, like Portugal, like Argentina with Juan Perón at that point, they're kind of isolated from the international community a little bit. They're trying to court the Americans. The Americans see the value of Spain for the Cold War, to put bases and things like that. Spain opens up to the world with tourism, start building wonderful little fishing villages like Benidorm, get sort of destroyed by concrete buildings. So, the international travel starts. So this time is kind of, Spain comes out of itself, internationalizes, really, people get to know it. And yes, there's like I said, a Falangista on every board at this point. So football was inherently political. But was he a Real Madrid fan? I think he saw the value of what Madrid was doing for Spain, and certainly, you know, the being from Madrid, it helped. If it'd been Valencia or someone like that, would they have been that interested? Would Franco have been that interested in a provincial club being so successful? But there's, I mean, I cover this in the chapter. There's a lot of, you know, I talk to some local researchers. We have to take a really nuanced approach to the way that football was run in those days. As I mentioned, there was a presence on every board, and yes, you know, Catalan was banned some places, but at the same time, some of the, you know, the publications are coming out in Catalan and Basque in the 1970s. You know, some of the club fanzines and things like that. So it's yeah, I think you have to sort of like myth bust to a certain extent to the Spanish game.
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot to talk about this regime, right? Because it literally involves the two most popular clubs in the world right now, right? Barcelona and Real Madrid, and I think that adds to the idea of myths that we normally see in football history studies. Just pointing out very quickly, normally people believes that Barcelona always was a site of resistance, right? And we know that that's not true. Barcelona was, as you mentioned, Chris, Franco implemented the fascist structure as well in football clubs and nominated the presence of every single club. Actually, that was made by the sports minister, right, at that time. But Barcelona was, we can say that Barcelona had more members linked to Franco regime than Real Madrid or any other club in Spain. Of course, this doesn't look good with the currently narrative of Barcelona, but that was the truth, right? We also need to acknowledge that those members were in favor of Franco regime, and we also saw in other clubs that happening. But Real Madrid, in its history, particularly in the Spanish Civil War, had one of the presidents, Ortega, the Colonel Ortega, was affiliated with the Soviet Union, the party in Moscow, and he was later killed by Franco's troops when he was trying to escape. Sanchez Guerra was very interesting a man, as you mentioned, because he was a Republican, but he was a conservative Republican, and he was even dismissed when the Front Popular took control of the club at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. One of my findings, Chris, and I think that was kind of relevant and to your point of Bernabeu as a nationalist, I would say that Bernabeu was a monarchist rather than a nationalist, because I was glad to have the chance to interview the member number 250 of Real Madrid. He's currently a journalist there in Spain, and his father was the agent of Puskas, and he was always with Bernabeu. And when he was a kid, he remembers moments in which Bernabeu was cursing Franco, and Raimundo Saporta was his right hand, and also there was another man, I think was another vice president. I don't remember. I don't remember his name exactly. It's in my dissertation, but he was like making fun of Bernabeu being pissed off because of Franco. So Bernabeu was always in contact with the royal monarchy when they were abroad in Switzerland. I would say from my findings that he was more a monarchist that hated Franco, but literally saw the benefits of, fulfilling the norms of the regime. Mm-hmm. And there is a very famous quote, I'm sure you read that, from Saporta, saying that Real Madrid has always been a political club, football club. Yeah. In the when there was a monarchy, they followed the monarchy. And then came the Spanish Civil War, they followed the rules of the Front Popular. Mm. And when Franco arrived in power, they followed Franco. And after with the 75, right, they also now a club that respects the monarchy regime. So it's I think there are so many insights and history. I would say that's still being written in Spain.
Oh yeah,
there's so many misconceptions that I think what you pointed out was correct.
I think with the internationalization of the sport, I when I did my dissertation, so late 90s, Barca didn't have a sponsor on their shirt, and so now I just see it as a commercial rivalry rather than a political one, because it's so international now. The players are from all over the world, the fan group base is all from all over the world, and it probably means, you know, something to a lot of people, the centre versus the Catalans, all that sort of thing, the traditional narrative, that may be something to some of those people. And obviously, if you're a Barca fan, or you probably do want to win that. But yeah, no, I just see it more as a commercial thing now. They're looking beyond Spain. They're looking to sort of, Asian markets and Middle Eastern markets and things like that.
Yeah, Alex?
I agree with Chris. You have to be extremely nuanced when it comes to the Real Madrid Barcelona rivalry. Sid Lowe, the Guardian journalist, has written a fantastic book called Fear and Loathing in La Liga, where he highlights this. And I attended a talk by Sid Lowe prior to COVID, where we were looking at the Spanish Civil War and football. And Sid was, in effect, making a point that a lot of the audience weren't expecting. He said, you cannot see Real Madrid as the fascist club and Barcelona as a Republican club. It doesn't work like that. There are fans on both sides that have political views that are not aligned to how Barcelona and Real Madrid are being portrayed politically. And it's always been the case.
Yeah.
Even in the early years post the Civil War, you couldn't just support a club because of your political affiliation. Some people may have done, but that was not the case.
Yeah.
And so you have to be extremely careful. And I'm with Chris now. Yeah, these are two multinational commercial organizations now.
Yeah,
their tentacles reach all over the world. But coming back to the Spanish Civil War, what I thought was quite interesting on the Republican side of things was that, other myths that, all the footballers were on the front line and so on. That wasn't the case. As Chris alluded to, we had a representative Barcelona team managed by their Irish manager O'Donnell, who was that was touring the United States and ended up playing in Mexico for a number of years to raise monies.
Yeah.
We have a Barca representative team that went behind, went over towards the Soviet Union as well, played a number of games around Europe, again to highlight the cause and so on. So footballers were being used in many different ways to further the Republican cause. So you have to be very careful how, particularly with the Spanish Civil War, how you sort of place football within that.
Yeah, it's I think it's very complicated, but at the same time super fascinating, right? Like we could talk for hours about this topic. 2 questions left. I think for the sake of respecting your times, I'm gonna jump into that. I think that's also gonna generate a lot of debates. So, Chris, there's a French philosopher called Paul Ricoeur that pointed out the misleading, deeply rooted belief that only the future is indeterminate and open, while the past is determinate and closed. From your perspective, what is the currently practical value in understanding the utilization of football by fascist regimes in the past? And do you believe football clubs should be transparent, acknowledging these historical ties with authoritarian regimes? And in your opinion, what might prompt football clubs to obscure, to marginalize these historical connections?
I think it's always, I think if everyone knew these basics of history, I think we'd all understand and various traits when they re-emerge. And we could probably make better policy towards countering them. But it's like what we're seeing at the minute is, especially with the rise of the right wing in Europe, it's always worth looking at what's happening in Germany. So Germany has been, I think, very good as a country of addressing its past in terms of how it teaches its children about its past. It's, this is within living memory as well. Let's not forget. This is a debate that we have in certain extent in Britain, but nowhere near addressed colonialism and things like that. We have people talking about the slave trade, and we have discussions around what should and shouldn't be returned from museums here and things like that. But it's nowhere near to the extent of Germany's fairly comprehensive, built into the educational system, and you see that in their clubs as well. So there's a lot of education that goes around, for fans, in terms of like countering sort of far right activism within the stadium, and bans. I personally, I'd like to think that every club who have had something in the past to discuss should say, hold their hands up and say, look, this happened, it was of the time. For example, St. Pauli, as you know, is they play at the Milan Tour, very famous, probably the original kind of left-wing football club, so to speak. They their previous name of the Milan Tour was I can't remember exactly, but he had been a member of the
Milan.
That's it, Milan. Had been part of the a member of, I should say, the Nazi Party, and they and that was still lingering on as its name until the 90s, and they just decided to change it. And I think that's one good example of when that should probably occur. I think the FA in England has been very good about admitting it was wrong about the 50-year ban, for example, or at least talking about it, and funding women's football to the point where England women are now European champions and reached the World Cup final with an unstrength side. So, clearly there's something healthy that going on, and the crowds are going up, etc. So I think that, if you've got some kind of something's happened in the past, at least acknowledge that, I think, and find ways to move on and maybe even compensate for those issues.
That's interesting, Alex.
Picking up on what Chris has said, really, I think there should be more direction and leadership from the footballing bodies, FIFA, and we'll use the European example, UEFA. And I point to the Qatar World Cup in terms of Didier Deschamps could have made history by becoming only the second manager to win 2 World Cups. The only other manager to do that was Pozzo of Italy, 34 and 38. But what we see is that FIFA, UEFA, and the Italian FA are burying the fact that this was a historical issue. And if Deschamps had done it, they would have just concentrated on Deschamps. They wouldn't have used Deschamps being a 2-time winner to actually make points about fascism and football, in my view. So if we are going to get a sea change in football clubs' behavior and acknowledgement of what's gone on in the past, I think that there needs to be some form of action from the governing bodies, because only through the governing bodies actually taking a proactive approach. And really, you saw how FIFA and its leadership backed away from using the World Cup to make some certain statements at the Qatar World Cup. Infantino, some of the comments he came out with, it was embarrassing, really. So, and if you're not getting the leadership from the governing bodies, both at national, continental, and international level, how are a lot of teams going to take the lead? As Chris said, there are, I think in Germany in particular, there are a number of football clubs, and I think Eintracht Frankfurt are another. There's a number of clubs who use their museums to actually deal with the Holocaust and other issues, and they do it fantastically well. But there are a lot of football clubs throughout Europe and elsewhere that will not address the issue.
Mm.
And if they don't address the issue, it's going to be there with their fans. And as we know, in a lot of countries, fans will be aligned to a club because of their political affiliations and support.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's I think a really key point, Alex. Particularly because when Chris mentioned St. Pauli, we know that that club is driven by the left-wing oriented political affiliation of a minority of around 1,000 fans. I can say that because I was doing research there as well, and that was very impressed by them. It's a minority, but the majority also follows in a certain way. But I think the main difference, and this is also a question that I would like to extend to Chris and Alex, and because Chris mentioned FA, the 50-year ban on women's football, but we also been see St. Pauli, Werder Bremen, Frankfurt, many clubs, many football fan projects literally digging into the history of the clubs to bring that to light, in a sense that they don't want that to repeat. They don't want authoritarian regimes coming back in place in Germany. I think one of my conclusions, my dissertation, was the fact that German society lives through a different temporal regime or a new cultural memory, in which the past, the present, and the future are not separated. They're not. They're all at the same time together. Okay, you cannot plan the future without accessing the past. And this ban that you mentioned, Chris, that the FA is now acknowledging, I wonder, and this is a question, I wonder if this is because it's impossible to neglect because we have women that we see every day and we need to take a stance. But why not the FA or other like UK federations do not acknowledge the historical cleavage derived from the domestic or internal wars between the UK, the Ireland, as you were talking last episode, Alex. So is a temporal kind of element?
I think with the women's game, certainly its recent success, obviously Lionesses has helped open the debate around, plus there's a whole lot of study going on anyway in this space. The National Football Museum in Manchester has been very good about trying to champion the women's game, the history of it, which a lot of people don't know. People don't realise things like the Dick Kerr ladies, which are that factory side that was getting 50,000 plus fans, or Manchester Corinthians, I think they were called, the team in the sort of 50s and 60s. So there's a lot to be sort of rediscovered about women's football. It wasn't getting the attention or the funding, from before. In terms of like addressing the past, I think pretty much, apart from Germany, every European country, I'm just trying to think, there's very few European countries that didn't have any kind of colonial kind of history. So it's kind of Spain in particular, I think would be one of the other ones. And in Spain, obviously, the post-Francoist debate has been very much one of sweep it under the carpet, the Pact of Forgetting, as it's known. And that's kind of coming back to hit them now, isn't it? Because they've got the whole, the rise of the far right there, plus there's whole like loads of debates around, exhumation of body from the Civil War and things like that, and even the moving of Franco's body. And that sort of plays itself out a little bit in the terrace, because you've got clubs that are a bit of a lightning bolt, like Rayo Vallecano, but literally in their case, because it's a lightning, that means lightning in Spanish, and the Brigadas Amarillas at Cadiz, which is kind of a left-wing fan group as well. I think that basically it's kind of like when they go to places with a traditional right-leaning, then they get some abuse, and that is there. We've seen that in Spain recently. Football in the UK is, apart from probably the sectarian element of Rangers Celtic, within the England and Scotland, there isn't really a political element to football. There is occasionally, you'll see like some silly comments by fans of certain clubs, aimed usually at Tottenham Hotspur or someone else, and or Brighton, and it's like the but other than that, and they're often just kind of condemned very swiftly. Other than, it's not really overtly political in this country at all. And Alex, I'd be interested if you agree with me on that one after this. But yeah, I think that, you know, there's in terms of like addressing the past, I think that's something that definitely everyone needs to do. And I think it's happening in little pockets here. Like I said, you know, in Liverpool, they've got a museum towards their history of involvement in the Atlantic slave trade. You know, Bristol, they toppled a statue to someone who was involved in it. So there's like these things, little movements are happening, but no one's, you know, in terms of like addressing the past, I think it's kind of, you know, football will have to play a role in that somehow. But, you know, I think they'll just happen organically, really.
I agree, Chris. In the UK, apart from the Scottish perspective, football clubs are not political through their fans. We've seen the odd instance at some football clubs, maybe in the 1970s, 80s, and sometimes in the 90s, the extreme far-right groups, such as the National Front, such as the British National Party, and more recently Britain First, trying to use what could be termed some of the football hooligan gangs, or what are now becoming the casual ultras, trying to use them as a vehicle to attempt to get their political views across, but it doesn't work. You know, the average, you know, British football fan is not interested in their football club being a vehicle for politics. You get the odd example where football clubs are politically driven, and Clapton Community Football Club is a great example, but they have been very explicit, and FC United as well. But if you are looking at the major, you know, professional football teams and into the semi-professional teams, no, it's just not on the agenda.
I think in the 70s and 80s that kind of worked because of the way that society was, and also because the football grounds are pretty ropey in those days, weren't they? They were really awful, but now they're very, I mean, they are amongst the best in the world. They're very clean. What's the word? I can't remember. A very, I say synthetic experience. Do you know what I mean? It's very plastic, but it's like, yeah, you're like, it wouldn't take off. I was saying this in another podcast recently. It hasn't come out yet, but I just think if you hear something in the stadium in England nowadays, it usually self-polices itself. You know, like either people won't join in and it will die out, or they'll report that person to a steward. So, you know, we're seeing less and less of the obnoxiousness, thankfully. And you know, I mean, a lot of other countries are learning from the anti-hooliganism stuff that went on in England to help combat their own problems.
I think the word you were looking for was sterile at times.
One.
So yeah, and I think and Chris touched upon women in football. But I think this will become highly politicized. And I think it's going to become highly politicized across the board, because where we may have a significant amount of investment in particularly the English game, but we're also seeing it in the Scottish game as well. There are still major issues with women's football, particularly elite football. We use the words equity and equality in women's football quite a bit now. Look at the pay scales. Look at where the elite women's teams actually play their home matches. And also the remuneration aspect of it. Now, you know, when the English women's team went to the World Cup, they were in dispute with the English FA over their remuneration and bonuses for partaking in the World Cup, because FIFA had arranged another remuneration and bonus system. The English FA, in effect, were sort of reneging on what the English players thought they would receive. Not only was it the England football team, but we had a number of other teams that had issues. We're obviously Spain, but we had Jamaica, we had Zambia, we had a number of teams all in dispute with their federations over issues. And the way I am seeing this, and I have been a chair of a women's football team in England, so I'm quite close to the women's game. And there is an issue over injuries and the type of injuries female footballers are getting, particularly in relation to their knees. There's a lack of research into the type of physical training that they need to undertake. There is also issues around the menstrual cycle. There are also issues even down to the type of stretching exercise female footballers need to do in relation to male footballers. And in particular, we are looking at footwear, which is still not on an equitable basis. And we had an issue with the England goalkeeper, Mary Earps, where the outfield players, Nike, were commercializing their shirts, but wouldn't sell a goalkeeper's shirt. That was brought to the fore, big furore within England, particularly amongst young female fans. That slightly changed. Nike had to pedal back significantly, but they only did so because of all the negative publicity. So really, I see that there is going to be significant political battles on equity and equality in the women's game. And thankfully, that's brought to the fore because of the success of the England women's football team. In the last 2 seasons, they are European champions, finalissima champions, silver medalists at the World Cup, and have won the Arnold Clark Cup twice. And if they hadn't had that success, would some of these issues have been brought to the public gaze in the way they have?
Also, you've neglected to mention that the president of the FA, was it Prince William, didn't go to the World Cup and got criticised for that. So it's been in the calendar for a very long time. It could have coincided with a tour or some other thing, visit to Australia. So yeah, that was perceived by some as a sort of lack of support.
It's very interesting because listening to you, I can remember the struggle of the Brazilian women's team also, or experience, since Brazil also had that ban for women to play for a long time, professional football, and pretty much is the same scenario that you guys have been mentioned. But one thing that caught my attention, and that's gonna to link to the final question, is the point that Alex made on the fact that UK football fans are not UK football are not political through their fans in general, right? Few exceptions, and I've been seeing so many angry comments from Newcastle fans related to the Saudi regime. I think it was yesterday, around 100 executions. Their fans posting on Twitter about them 100 executions made by the owner of Saudi, of Newcastle, right? Because it's associated with the state, and criticizing this ownership. So my question to you, Chris, and also expecting your comments, Alex, is around if there are any parallels to be drawn between the strategies employed by traditional fascist regimes and those currently known as non-democratic regimes, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, in their political manipulation of football. Can you establish any parallels between the past and the present involving football in this regime?
Yeah, I mean, I'd widen it, actually. I think that football is incredible soft power for every country. So if I think about New Zealand, for example, how aware would be of them if it weren't for their excellent rugby team and all that sort of thing. Likewise, Australia is a massive part of their sort of soft power, winning things abroad for a country with less than 20 million people. So that's kind of, I think that we always have to think that it's a massive part of any national identity, even in a sort of like flourishing democracies, that everyone wants to do their country to do well. On the modern So are you talking about sports washing sort of front, right? I think, I mean, it just goes back to the central core, is that sports and politics are intertwined, and they will, it was ever thus, and it will always be so as well. So people who aim to seek an advantage will, you know, may well do that. And obviously, a lot of these countries you mentioned are very rich; they can afford to, you know, purchase football clubs and things like that. The question is really, the onus isn't really on either of those you know, regimes. The onus is on people like the Premier League and the FA to sort of decide whether or not they want this sort of intervention to be happening, and who should be buying their clubs, clubs in those countries. So yeah, that would be kind of my take on it personally on that front. I'm interested to hear what Alex says.
No, I'm in agreement with you, Chris. Again, it's, you know, it's your governing bodies. They need to set the parameters. And it's interesting that you mentioned Newcastle, Felipe, because we all know that football fans can be a bit fickle. When the previous owner, Mike Ashley, was in power, Newcastle fans would take every opportunity to remind him of how badly he treated his Sports Direct employees. You know, and then suddenly you have a new ownership and nothing is said. You know, it's, you've got that, you know, football fans, if it suits them, they will use political mechanisms and issues. When it doesn't, and you know, you've highlighted the ownership of Newcastle United, but in one sense, you've got two significant nations that are making an impact: Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They are being very astute as to how they are investing in football and why they are investing in football. Now, if you want to make the parallels, look at the parallels in Franco's Spain and Mussolini's Italy. Both made significant investment, political and financial, in football, and they reaped the benefits of that. And again, I would say, though, these are the modern parallels. And, you know, there are a number of political and economic reasons why Saudi Arabia and Qatar in particular are investing in football. Now, if you're looking at the economic reasons, both nations need to diversify their economies. They cannot be just reliant on fossil fuels.
Yeah,
they're not infinite, so they are broadening their approach.
I think
so again, it's economic, it's political, but it does follow a pattern. If you want to link it back to the 1930s and 1940s with some of the fascist regimes.
Yeah, no, I think listen to you, Alex. I can't quite remember when Franco, after he got in power, he decides which teams would be formed, right? Like, and which presidents would be in charge. Also, there was changes in the rules of the game, of the competition in Spain. Something that we've been seeing with Saudi Arabia in this new transfer window that they have come up with to get most players from all over the world. I think maybe the question, as we also should pitch, is when these governing bodies will stop being dependent on the money from these countries, right? Because money dictates pretty much every decision that they have been doing. When it's not possible to hold the media pressure, like we have been seeing with Gazprom and Russia, when Gazprom was the sponsor of UEFA Champions League, and the UEFA part ways with Gazprom, was because the public sentiment was not anymore doable to sustain, right? Like there was a lot of criticism. Probably the question then is when the criticism to Saudi Arabia and Qatar will be to that extent.
I'll let Chris interject in a minute, but I'm just not convinced that that will ever occur now. I think, you know, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other nations are so embedded in the governing bodies now. You know, they've got personnel who hold significant positions.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll point to two factors in particular. The Qatar Men's World Cup, the basically dampening down of, you know, issues such as taking the knee, LGBT plus issues were completely, you know, pushed aside. You know, Infantino with his quite bizarre comments, you know, deadened them. We then get to the Women's World Cup and they can't wear the rainbow armbands. You know, you've got, you know, and so issues that are very important in certain national contexts and cultures cannot be taken onto the world stage, or if they are sort of, you know, the footballing governing bodies will quickly stamp upon them. And we've seen the evidence of that. And I think one of the most interesting examples is Jordan Henderson, the ex-Liverpool player, who was very vociferous in support of LGBTQ plus issues. Now is in a very fragile and sensitive position, because he now plays in the Saudi Pro League. He plays for one of the teams that has significant government influence one way or t'other. And what can he say? I mean, he came out and did an interview with The Athletic saying he felt, you know, that he was being badly treated. But you can't make some statements in one context a few months ago and then not make those comments again when you're in another context. So that's quite an issue for me.
Yeah, I don't think one can hide behind not knowing about the Saudi regime either, or any of the other regimes. So, you know, I saw a former ex-professional on TV saying, "Oh, we're not educated, us footballers." It's like, well, educate yourself. Likewise, fans, learn about the world. It goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning about learning about history. And then, I mean, personally, I mean, I'm a lapsed Queen's Park Rangers supporter, and the reason I didn't like, and I'm kind of back now in the fold, so to speak, but I kind of didn't go for a very long time because I didn't like the owner at the time and what they were doing to various kind of, you know, to the club, changing the crest, rebranding and all that sort of thing. And it's, you know, it's the same with any club. If you choose, you can, you know, maybe if you feel that way about it, maybe you just don't go anymore. Don't give them any money. Don't watch them. But like you said, I mean, I'm sure a lot of Newcastle fans were criticizing Man City a few years ago, and now, you know, that now they're probably don't mind getting some investment after the Ashley years, you know. And so it's a question, yes, fans, players alike, let's learn about the world and everything in it.
Yeah, I think we can say that the politics that people normally engage when interests them are avoided, if football is their football passions, right, are in between. I think it depends on the context. It depends if favors or not. Therefore, we can, as Alex mentioned, we can understand the different, and Chris also pointed out the different behaviors from Newcastle fans in the past and now under the new ownership. Chris and Alex, I will now give you the word for final considerations. Any topics, any points that you wanna highlight that we were not able in those 5 set of questions. Now it's the time. I will pass the word to Chris first.
I think in summary, I think we've kind of a theme that's come through it. Football's always been political. Sport in general has always been political. Let's look at the Moscow Olympics, Beijing Olympics, Berlin Olympics. So it's always been political. It always will be. And so some places more than others. I think it does reflect certain elements of society at the time. particularly within a masculine context, or increasingly as the females, the women's game gets kind of more, prominent, certainly in that context, as societal context, wider societal context as well. So, there's various things that we can learn about the game and history through studying it, and this is why I hope people will continue to examine the sport as closely as possible.
And before I give you the word, Alex, I will ask Chris where people can find you. What's your Twitter?
You can follow me at Outside Right. That's WRITE, and that's on Instagram and Twitter/X predominantly. I'm also got my personal feed on there, which is at CMR Lee, which is my initials, but you'll find me talking about work and various other things on there, so you probably won't find as much football chat. So Outside Right is where you're at for the football.
Amazing. Make sure everyone follows Chris' Twitter account, the Outside Writer, because there's a lot of good content.
And I'll be restarting the podcast in October. I've got some really great guests coming on, and we'll be talking about Brazilian football as well this coming series. I shan't say any more than that at the moment.
That's great. Now make sure also to provide the link for the podcast out in the description of this video.
Perfect, thanks. And there's loads on outsideright.co.uk. Okay,
amazing. Thanks, Chris. Alex, final considerations.
I'm going to plug Chris here. Chris is absolutely right. Football fans just need to educate themselves, and it's reading Chris's books. It's listening to his Outside Right podcast, and there's many others who have got really informative podcasts, and there's lots of good books out there now that deal with both the political and football and war aspects that we've been discussing today. So basically, don't pretend that you don't know. There's plenty out there to educate yourself, and it's not all academic at all. It's written by fellow football fans and those interested from many different perspectives.
Yes, I think education has been the word today for today's talk, and I really want to appreciate once more Chris' time and Alex's time for being here, for sharing all this deep knowledge about football history and also football and society, because they're very intertwined. And I wish you guys had also a blast listen to them. Make sure to follow Chris, Outside Writer, in Twitter, and the Football and War Network as well, that is chaired by Alex. And we are a football studies channel on YouTube. Okay, so stay tuned for the last episode next week, in which we will be talking about community-based football clubs in the UK. So stay tuned and don't miss it. Thank you very much, Chris and Alex, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Philippe.